Hattler. Welcome to the channel.
Yay. I'm excited.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the amazing Diane Hattler, one of my dearest and oldest friends from college. We went to a college where there were no fraternities or sororities.
Reason I went.
So what we ended up doing is forming this really tight four-woman team that have reconnected now in our adulthood. And she is going to tell us about her experiences and how she got into teaching after being, you were a geologist, right?
Right. Field geologist at the Nevada test site.
Wow. So she had a large range of experiences. So Diane, tell me how you ended up a teacher.
So I worked 9 years on what was called the Yucca Mountain Project as a technical writer, because I have a degree from New Mexico Tech in tech communications, and then moved into the geology department when everything moved to the field, which was my dream. And I have a geology degree from New Mexico Tech. So in 95, kind of like what's happening now, they were shutting down projects and laying people off. And my dad had died, and I came back to Virginia to help my mom out. And she needed some items delivered to this place called Girls Probation House, which her women's club sponsors. And when I went there, to make a very long story short, one of the teachers was struggling on how to use these brand new computers the school had just delivered. And I said I could teach her some things, right? And so she was excited because she's like, make it a typewriter, right? Make it so I can just do typewriting. And I'm like, I could teach you more than that. So it was the day before Christmas break. So she had me come back in the new year when the start of the school to teach her and the other teacher at this probation house. So the probation house was for 12 girls who had a variety of different felonies. It could have been shoplifting. I mean, nothing like murder, but shoplifting, gang involvement. Most of them were in gangs. You know, weapons at school, that type of thing. So they lived at this probation house. They went to school there. They had two um, Fairfax County teachers, one who did the English and history, and one who did the math and sciences. And so I was to go back the first day of school in the new year to teach the two teachers basic computers. I created a cheat sheet for them, everything. So I show up thinking this is going to be a 1 day thing for a few hours. I show up and the teacher comes up to me, Miss Jolene. She was from New Orleans and she had a very New Orleans accent. And she goes, I'm just so excited. And I'm like, okay. She goes, I got permission for you to teach the girls keyboarding and computers. And I'm like, in 1 day? She goes, no, the whole rest of the year. So it wasn't, could you teach? It's, you are teaching these 12 girls computer science. And I'm like, I am. I mean, grateful I was unemployed and looking for work. And so I had the time to do this. So jumped right in with these 12 girls. And so what I was going to teach the teachers, I just started teaching the girls. And um, Jolene's like, and you're going to do this every day. And I'm like, oh, I am. So every day I would go. The third day, one of the girls came up to me and she goes, you're the first volunteer to last more than 3 days. And I go, what do you mean? What do you mean last more than 3 days? Well, when they find out our backgrounds, they are too terrified and they leave. So, of course, in my mind, I'm like, they're too terrified and they leave. And I'm like, what terrifies the people? Oh, because, we're gang members, we belong to MS-13 or what. I'm like, okay, you told me, I'm just thinking of sweet little teenagers that probably, took a lipstick from Kmart, and no,
Right.
no. So, but I really started getting close to these girls, and and kept stressing to them the power of knowledge and the power of education, because all of them are like, I am a criminal, I'm a gang member, I have no future. And I'm like, everything can be taken away from you, but education.
Right.
If you earn a degree, it's yours for life. It doesn't matter what happens to you, it's your degree for life, for life. And every
Better
time I
than a
talk to,
tattoo.
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Because I was telling them, because I had at that time 2 degrees. I said I have a tech communications degree, I have a geology degree, I have options. All these, all kinds of options. And while I was there, I decided to go for my master's in business. And so I started back to school, doing graduate school at a local university while I was volunteering there. And the more I volunteered, the more I really got into working with these teenagers. I hated being a teenager, but I loved working with teenagers. I learned so much from them on all kinds of levels. So at one point, the director of the program came up to me and she goes, "We want to hire you as a relief counselor." And I'm like, "I'm a geologist. I'm not a counselor. I don't know anything about counseling." And the teacher overheard this and she comes running in. She goes, "You're not getting her as a relief counselor. I just did all the paperwork to sign her up as a substitute so she can get paid and then be a substitute teacher for us." So, and she said something to the director. The director backed down instantly. She goes, "For Marcia," who was the other teacher. And I'm like, "For Marcia, what's going on?" Well, it turned out Marcia had breast cancer and had to
Oh,
take time off for, treatment and surgery and all that. And
yeah.
so she didn't work for the rest of the school year. So Jolene's like, "You might as well do her science and math classes and get paid for it." And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay. I don't know anything about math." I said, "Granted, I'm only short 2 classes in getting a basic science degree in math, but I know nothing about math." And of course, they're like, "Oh, there's teacher books. You can figure it out." I'm like, "Can we focus on the science classes?" I don't have any Harper doing any science. And it was interesting because Fairfax County at that time had a lot of alternative schools, a boys probation house. They had several mental health group homes. They had several substance abuse group homes, all of which had Fairfax County teachers. So it was really cool, the science part of it, because they had science in a box, right? And so you would get this big Rubbermaid container and it'd be experiments 1 through 3, right? And they divide it in three, and it's like the teacher's guide, the worksheets that you can Xerox for the kids, and then all the things to do your little experiments, like one of which was to show how much oil is in Fritos and you can use them as fire starters. And I'm like, I am never eating Fritos again. It's like, but it was, I love the experiments because it hooked the girls in, because it's stuff that they could relate to. It's stuff that it's like, "Oh yeah, we go camping. We could use it." So from that point on, when we went camping with the girls, fire starter Fritos. But it was interesting because I did not do math well, and there was a girl in the program who repeat offender, and I was really struggling with teaching a math class, and she's like, "Diane, you just need to do this, this, this." And I looked at her, I said, "Do you know how to do this?" She goes, "Yeah, I can just see it." She could see
Oh,
how math is solved. And
yeah.
I'm like, "Are you kidding me? You're like, that's what I call math genius, right?"
Yeah.
And so she became my teacher's aide, which really boosted her confidence, that she knew something more than somebody who had 2 college degrees, and it just really inspired her. I often wondered if she ever did go, because I'm like, "You need to go to school, you need to major in math anybody who can see math, that's your thing, right?
Yeah.
And she loved it. And she loved it. The other thing that was a neat experience about math there is our mutual friend Leslie, who's an engineer,
Right.
came to visit, and I said, well, I have to teach at the school in the mornings. Could you do the math classes? And she's like, oh, sure. So she took all the kids to do math, and I did all the science, right? It was great. Each girl came running in right before lunch, and they were like, I can't believe how fun math is. And I'm like, math is fun? Yeah. She told us this equation means this, and this equation means that. And I'm like, equations mean things? I didn't know that. And so Leslie comes in, I said, equations mean things? And she's like, Diane, didn't you listen at school? I'm like, nobody taught me that an equation means something. So anyway, so she was a natural math teacher. And I'm like, Leslie, quit your job and please come back and teach math. But it was really interesting because as a kid, I pretended to be a teacher and make lesson plans and stuff, and then made all my dolls.
Yeah.
And then to kind of live out that dream, it was like, oh, this is neat. But I'll tell you, I learned more from those girls than I did from me teaching them, you know.
And you did eventually become their counselor, right? I mean, that eventually happened.
One of the counselors there who I'm still very good friends with talked me into what she goes, why are you getting a business degree? Get a degree in counseling. And I'm like, I know nothing about counselors. She goes, Diane, you're a natural with these girls. And it was interesting because they had to do what was called ICs. They had to do a certain amount of individual counseling sessions every week as part of their probation. And so they're like, Diane, I want to do an IC with you. I'm like, no, absolutely not. And they're like, why? I'm like, I'm not a counselor, And so the director came up to me and she goes, the girls are requesting to do counseling sessions with you. I said, I'm not a counselor. I'll probably say something wrong and they'll slit their wrists and then it'll be my fault. Right. And the director's like, Diane, you're not going to say anything. Have these girls slit their wrists. I can guarantee that. I guarantee. She said the biggest thing is they just need to tell their story, own up for what they did, how they see their future, what mistakes they made in the past, is it helping them in the to change their life, that type of thing. I'm like, fine, I can do that. So the very first girl who comes up to me, I want you have permission to do IC, so I want to do IC with you. I'm like, okay. So we're sitting in the counseling room, and I'm like, so what do you want to talk about? And she goes, well, I really have to talk about cutting. So this was the 90s. And in the 90s, I was really into scrapbooking. And you cut paper and you cut everything into shapes. And I'm thinking,
Oh.
oh, cool, she's into scrapbooking. And I said, that's so cool. Now, here's a cutter thinking, she thinks this is cool. So here, I'm living out my biggest fear as I'm going to say the wrong thing, right? And so the shock on her face tells me, okay, something's wrong. I said,
Yeah.
you're into scrapbooking, right? And she goes, scrapbooking? And so I said, well, yeah, you cut paper. So she laughed so hard, she literally fell on the floor. And I'm like, okay, it must be scrapbooking. She goes, Diane, I'm a cutter. I said, okay, what does that mean? I had never heard, geologist in the field, in the Mojave Desert, we don't deal with cutting, right?
No.
So she goes, this is cutting. She took her long sleeve, pulled it up, not one normal piece of skin, all scarred from cutting, years
Oh.
and years of cutting. To this day, I dealt with a lot of cutters in my profession. She absolutely was the most intense cutter I'd ever met. Severe abuse. And so, typical ignorance. I grabbed her arm and I'm like, oh my God, who did this to you? And so then I became Mama Bear. like, who did this to you? We got to report them. We got to get them in jail. You know, and she's like, Diane's a crazy woman, right? And she goes, Diane, I did this. And I'm like, why would you do this? You know? And so, you know, I learned a ton about cutting from her because I just kept going, why would you do this? Well, how does that help? What does this mean? You know? And when she graduated from the program, she said, the person who helped me the most was Diane, the one person who's not a counselor. And I'm like, how did I help? And she goes, everybody who did counseling with me always had a straight face, never showed emotion, you know, very clinical. And when I saw the shock on your face of, oh my God, who did this to you? And you became protective, like, I need to protect this kid against whoever. And she said, it hit me that she's willing to protect me against me. Yeah. You know, and she said, because she asked a ton of questions of why do you do this and how does that help? It got me to think, why am I doing this? You know, because at one point I said, so is this a habit? And she's like, I don't know, maybe it is now. Because it had gone on for years. And I said, well, what do you think would happen if you didn't do it one time? She said, nobody had asked that before. Nobody had really talked about, let's try one time not doing it, see what happens, you know? And she goes, I think I'll be really anxious. I said, I think we can work on anxiety. I said, I don't know what to do. I said, there's a lot of counselors in this building who probably help with anxiety, you know? And so I learned with my counseling part that one, when you're in a session, especially with a teenager, they're a partner in their own treatment.
Right.
You know, and they are the ones who know what's going on and they need to explain it. And that even happened in the classroom. You know, like you could tell when a kid's having a bad day. And you're like, okay, they're not into learning anything because something's happening. Right. You know, and one of the things I learned is you got to meet a kid where they're at.
Right.
You know, and so when I would pull them inside and say, what's going on, you know, I don't want to talk about it. I said, oh, so you like being in this feeling of yuck. What do you mean? It's like, well, if you don't want to talk about it, nothing's going to change. So I was even able to do counseling in the school part because if they're mind on something else, they're not going to learn. So, and with these girls, there was always something. You know, the court date's coming up, or one of the girls said something mean because you got a house of 12 teenage girls.
Yeah.
Drama.
Yeah. It can get rough.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me that someone who lived a life, well, we have one thing in common in this way. We neither one have biological sisters.
Right.
Leslie and Deborah both do. But you and I grew up in boy households. So a lot of the stuff that was very girly, I just didn't know about until I was more grown up.
Same here.
This is totally off on a weird corner, but it's the kind of thing that I think would happen usually in a girl's environment, but it happened to me as a grown-up woman in school. This girl was in class and she had this strange thing on her lip. And I said, "What happened?" And she looked at me. She looked at me like she was mad at me. And she said, "I had to wax my upper lip because I was getting a mustache." And she looked at me like, "And so do you." I was like, "Oh, you, okay, so I'm going to have to figure out how to do that."
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you, especially when I moved to a different group home, and it was more mental health, and they all had trauma and were abused. Oh my God. They would come in and they're like, Diane, we need to talk to you. I'm like, okay, we got to work on this hair. I'm like, what? My hair? And it's like, yeah, how are we going to get you a man with your hair looking like this? And I'm like, oh, that's the goal, is to get me a man. I'm like, I think the goal is to get you guys out of here. You know? But oh, I would walk in and they're like, you purposely picked that outfit to wear today? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You know?
You care
Like,
about what I'm wearing? Really?
oh yeah.
That
Well, and
matters?
well, and what was so funny is because we would go out in public, these girls had to learn life skills. You know, coming from abusive homes, they didn't know how to do laundry, shopping, cooking, nothing to be an independent kid. And because when they turned 18, they were out of the system. So our job was to get them as independent as possible. So it's like, you know, they only had one teacher at that program because there was 8 girls. But you know, they learned independent living skills with every single thing, including buying their school supplies, you know, getting the list, going to the, you know, to wherever we can get the cheapest place because money was tight, and teaching them how to find bargains. And, you know, of course, they want the prettiest and, you know, the fanciest. And it's like, okay, that'll last you a month and you have until June.
Right. Right.
So, yeah. So, but yeah, it was fascinating because we were lucky because being just outside of Washington, D.C., we got tickets to the Forest Theater twice a year. We always got to see A Christmas Carol right before Christmas, and then whatever play they were doing in the spring. You know, we have the Smithsonian, which is free. And on weekends, I would take them to different, especially the Natural History Museum. But everything was a learning thing with me, you know, is you know, teaching them about DC, walking around the monuments, telling them what the Vietnam War was about, and the Korean War, and then, like I said, you know, they were really into, I want to be able to have a diamond ring. I said, you know what? I'm going to take you to a place where there's the biggest blue diamond in the world. And they're like, what do you
Stunning.
mean? Yeah. And so, you know, or um, do you guys know where the flag is that inspired the Star Spangled Banner? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, what do you mean? What do I mean? A flag inspired the Star Spangled Banner. I said, what do you think Star Spangled Banner is? You know, so, you know, so we went down to, so even though I was their counselor, when we were on field trips, it was, I always believed, because that's the way I was raised. My parents raised me that way.
Yeah.
Everything's education and learning. And my parents loved history. So, and Virginia, tons of history. DC, of course, tons of history. And then a lot of nature. Like I would take them on walks and say, okay, whoever can find this rock, it'd be like quartzite, the most common rock. You know, whoever can find it first, you know, gets a candy bar. And it's like, oh,
Oh, yes.
uh,
Oh, the memories of tech. Oh my gosh, the memories of
anticline.
tech.
Yeah. And of course, I had to take him to, drum roll, the Bamboo Run. Inside joke. Oh. For those of you who don't know, the Civil War, the North had a name for a battle and the South had a name for a battle. And the North named the battles after the different towns, like Manassas, Battle of Manassas, first Manassas, second Manassas. The South named it after the local creek or stream that ran through the battlefield. And the creek was Bull Run. And one of the things about Virginia is we will run words together. And Eva's like, what are you saying? And I'm like, the Bamboo Run. And you're like, the Bamboo Run? I said, yeah. And you said, I don't know what I just said. I'm like the Battle Blue Run, you know, Civil War. Uh, oh,
Do you remember we did the Civil War battlefield? Do you remember going there together down south of Socorro? There's a
right,
monument
right.
to
There's
a
a
Civil War
monument.
battle. Yeah, and you and I think it was Deb. It was the
Dad
three
was
of
there.
us. We went down and visited that monument. And
Somewhere I have a picture of the three of us because
yes,
I put my camera on timer,
yes.
and then yeah,
Oh,
yep,
it was great. It was a cold day, but it was beautiful. It was clear
right, right. And
and
it got us off campus.
anything, anything that would get us off campus. You
Yeah.
know?
Mm, yeah.
So, you have since retired. You're no longer counseling or
Counseling.
teaching, right?
Pardon?
You're no longer counseling or teaching.
Right, right.
You're part
So
of the retired world.
yes, I got my master's in counseling, went through the whole price process to become a licensed professional counselor, what we call LPC for Virginia. That's so I'm allowed to like have my own practice and bill insurance companies. And I specialized in trauma and loss and grief. A little bit of ADHD because it's so commonly diagnosed when it's really anxiety instead.
Oh,
So
really?
it's one of the things I learned from one of the people I worked with who was a psychologist who did teaching is everybody I would swear they have ADHD. She goes, well, let's see. So she'd do the tests and come back anxiety. So a lot of times when kids are diagnosed with ADHD and the meds aren't working, it's because they really have anxiety and they need an anti-anxiety med, which is totally the opposite of the stimulants used for ADHD. And
Right.
so, for any teacher out there who is thinking that somebody has ADHD, it really helps to have them tested to make sure it's ADHD and not anxiety because totally different treatment and totally different medicine. So,
Wow. Now, see, that's very useful knowledge, and people
yeah.
don't aren't aware of that.
No, not at all. And that was one of the biggest things I educated parents with because they were all like, I need a psychiatrist for my kid to get ADHD meds. And I'm like, let's first get them tested.
Right.
And majority of them was anxiety. And I'll tell you, with COVID, the amount of anxiety in the kids at Fairfax County that I dealt with just went off the charts, off the charts. One of the things that did improve is the kids that were bullied actually did better in school because they were no longer bullied,
Right.
because everything
Right.
was virtual. So, and then their anxiety went up when they had to go back to school. So, but one of the bad things is kids really got away from how do you socialize because
Yep.
they already do all the social media stuff and everything online. And then when they weren't even going to school, oh, their social schools, reading social cues. Some kids were getting misdiagnosed with Asperger's, thinking that they're missing social cues when it was because of COVID and just not being around other people.
Right.
So they didn't learn how to, I mean, that's one of the things you learn in school is, reading social cues and how do you interact with people.
Right.
So,
And you we all have been kind of coping with the aftermath of the pandemic,
right,
because uh, almost everybody who works has to cooperate with somebody.
right.
Almost every job requires cooperation with another human being.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were pulled out and we were pulled aside and we were living in these little bubbles, um, it was like living at the ranch, you know. You're everybody's living at the ranch now. There are
Yeah.
four people hanging out together who can't stand outside of each other anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the things that I think really surprised a lot of people because if you're not in the business of working with young people and training them, you think there's nothing to it
Right.
because your memory of it is sort of twisted. It's not quite right. It doesn't quite know. And you think, oh, it's simple. You know, you just get in the room and share.
Yeah.
And then you discover, oh my gosh, it's not just get in the room and share. There's a lot more involved in that environment that helps people get ready for adult life, especially adult
Well,
life away from the family.
and I have an MBA and the master's in counseling, and both required group projects.
Yeah.
And because the work environment, you deal with groups, and it's
Yes.
amazing that the kids who were doing college during COVID didn't get the group experience unless they did a virtual, and I learned a lot in this group project because there's always be somebody who slacked and got the same grade I did,
Yeah.
and then there was others that it had to be their way or no way. And it's like, okay, how do we compromise? So I hated those group projects, but in the end, it really helped you learn dynamics of the group and working with people,
Right.
you know,
And especially people that you're not related to who may
right.
have different cues and
And
different
values.
yes.
Oh
Yes.
my God. I worked with several people that, stabbing people in the MBA program, outside of DC, stabbing people in the back, that's pretty much a requirement. And I'm like, wait a minute, if you do that, that's going to screw them over. And they're like, exactly. Like, and I'm like, I can't be a part of this. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh.
I'm going to sit over
Uh,
here now. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah, I learned very quickly who are the backstabbing, ladder climbing people, and I would avoid them at all costs. I was
Yeah.
very lucky in this one marketing class that I had to take where I picked out very quickly the people who had similar moral values, and it was a phenomenal experience. Whereas listening to everybody else work, it was like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not in that group. Oh my God. Yeah, because it was interesting because the school was in Arlington, which is literally a stone's throw from DC. And most of these people, worked for a government agency, worked, they worked in the office of Congressman so and so or Senator so and so or at the State Department. They were, the assistant to the, below, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So,
You have had such a varied experience between the incredibly connected urban world there in Virginia and the incredibly remote, disconnected world of Pahrump, Nevada,
yeah,
and
that's
everything in
true.
between.
They say this generation is going to have like 6 or 7 careers,
Uh-huh.
right? Not just jobs, careers. And I feel like that's what I can claim. And it's based on education. Both my
Right.
parents really stressed for me getting education. And I'd heard my whole life education's power. And that's what I stress to the girls I worked with is the more education you have, the more options. So if one job was going down the tubes, it's like, okay, maybe I better find a job in this. And if I couldn't find a job, it's like, well, I need to go back to school.
Yep.
It wasn't even like a question, oh, should I go back to school? It's like, okay, I'm going back to school. So I mean, I'm a big believer in education at any age, you know.
Is the perfect note for us to end on. And I'm telling you right now, Diane, I am so thankful that you were willing to do this. And it was so fun getting to visit with you and see your beautiful research office,
My family history room.
your family history room. Awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
And I love you, Diane. You are a
Love you
doll.
too.
And I'll talk to you soon.